This episode is brought to you by Merge Marketing for all of your needs on print, design, web page design, and security. Go to mergemarketinginc.com. Hello, welcome to Submerge Life Podcast, submergelife.com. I am your host, Tony. I'm sure you probably already know that because you've seen every single episode. I have an amazing guest this week, or this episode. He's just an awesome dude. I've known him for a while. And we are going to dive in and we're going to ask two questions. How are you submerging into life? And what's the journey that brought you here? So, ladies and gentlemen, help me welcome Jacob Ellis. What's up, Jacob?
What's up?
How you doing? How you doing, man?
Doing well.
Yeah, good week.
Yeah, pretty good week. Yeah, I'm in San Jose doing some reserve duty stuff, so it's a little change of pace from my normal work, which is kind of fitting for what we're going to talk about today.
Nice. All right. Well, let's just jump right into it. How are you submerging into life?
How am I submerging into life? So it's hard to think of an exact answer because I'm a pretty verbose person. For those who know me, I like to go all the way around and then answer it at the end. So I'll try to be succinct.
Yeah.
I'm really spread thin in this current moment of my life. I'm doing a lot of things which personally, sometimes I'm tempted to feel like I'm not committing to one thing, but I'm doing five things. But the season that I'm in right now is really realizing I don't have to have all my energy committed towards one specific thing all the time. I don't have to have all of my focus on the 1, 30, 40, 50 year track, knowing what's next, knowing what 5 years from now is, what 10 years is from now. And so today, the meditation that I kind of walk through in this season of life is realizing it feels like chaos because it kind of is, but realizing that God's going to take care of the details and I don't have to have a 3 to 5 year plan, which is, I don't know if you know this, it's what we're told is required, all the time.
Yeah.
So trusting God one step at a time, even when it feels crazy.
Yeah. Okay. Well, then let's talk about this journey, man, because you've had a number of great things go on in your life, a number of struggles and all that, and I want to hear all of it. So we're going to be here for the next 16 hours because I want to hear it all. No, I'm just kidding. Let's start at the beginning. Let's talk about family. Where'd you come from? Like
born and
mom,
raised,
dad, brothers, siblings?
Yeah, born and raised Fresno, California. Went to Bulldog football games since I was a toddler. Went to Fresno State, God's providence, got a scholarship there, kept me in Fresno. I have one sister, mom and a dad. Pretty small family, not a lot of uncles and aunts. So everything was pretty intimate and close growing up. Grew up in the Sequoias, going up to Big Meadows, love the Sierra Nevadas. And so then when I went to Clovis North High School, graduated, coming on like 12 years ago now, which makes me feel old. And I
don't even talk about that, man. I mean, I'm 29, but we all know that's not true.
Yeah, you look good. So providentially, part of my story, I was going to go to Cal Poly or the Air Force Academy, but I got a scholarship to go to Fresno State, which no one really wants to stay in Fresno if they can avoid it, at least when you're 18. But I took it, and I ended up spending 4 years at Fresno State, and that's where I became my freshman year of college. I interacted with some Christians, and I was really attracted to, many things, but most importantly, I was attracted to the certainty that they had in why they were living, like why they had life, what they lived for. They served each other, right? In retrospect, I realized that what was attractive about them to me was the hope that they had in Jesus, right? And so at the time, had friends, made some new Christian friends, might have been interested in one of the girls, going to church, tried some things out. I grew up without any scripture. I never read the Bible a single time growing up, didn't go to church, atheist in high school. But then I got myself a Bible because someone recommended that I read the Gospel of Matthew. And I'm really glad they did that rather than, start in like Leviticus or something. And I only made it to Matthew 5 when I read the Beatitudes, specifically when Jesus says, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." That was on my 19th birthday. I remember it to this day, sitting on my bed, just realizing in that moment that if Jesus is real, I wanted to know more about him. And he's saying to come to him. So I'm going to come to him. I'm going to give him what I have, which is nothing. And he's going to set me free from many things more than I knew at that time. And so with that,
what was your life? What
go
was
ahead.
your life before? Yeah, let's backtrack a little bit. What was your life before Fresno State? Was it full of craziness? Were you out partying, drinking, or were you like a pretty good kid?
That's actually a great part of the story. So that's a good question. So I was a pretty good kid, raised with good respect, tried to take care of people, served. I was part of, different programs for like community service and stuff. And I think that people would say I was pretty good. I didn't go out drinking and doing all these objectively, immoral things. Right. But behind the scenes, I was a compulsive liar. I was a thief, stole a lot in high school from people, specifically my parents, which we had reconciliation for after. Praise God for that. And I also kind of the standard story had a deep addiction of video games and pornography and stuff that just really consumed my life as a young kid. But I had nothing to attribute it to because I was just, I didn't believe in God, and that was just what you do.
Yeah.
But I was a good kid on the outside.
On the outside, yeah, but then inside you are like wrestling with all of this stuff and just indulging in it. So when you crashed into faith inside at Fresno State and you started, going to this group, was it a club or a church or what was it?
So it's threefold. So got plugged into the Well Community Church, like many of us. Great fellowship there, great teaching. Sat under Brad and Shay's teaching for a while, which really blessed me theologically. Really gave me a strong hunger to know more about the Word. Then I was plugged into a group called LOS back in the day, which was this. Some people may remember it, but it was a Friday night hangout of like college kids. They ended up going and planting a church, but that was a good community where I met a lot of people. And then I was part of Campus Crusade for Christ at Fresno State as well, which is where I first had met all the Christians that had shared the gospel with me. So I kind of was, my whole life was all about Christianity right after I became a believer. I went
So I'm sure that the moment you became a believer, like your life was perfect, right? You stopped lying, you stopped, I'm sure it was just like clean and you didn't struggle with anything from the second one. Well, I mean from the first second. But what was that journey like in the stuff that you were going, and then you meet this God and you're like, whoa, this is very contradictory of each other. How did that look?
So you made that joke earlier about the 16 hours. So I'm going to respect our time and not go too far in the weeds. I mean, there's so many funny stories of, just connecting with high school friends, connecting with people who knew me before, people I was still kind of going out with and spending time with when I shouldn't have been. And then this Christian community, which in itself is something that God desires, right? But it can become an idol where we suddenly only spend time with Christians 100% of the time. And we build a little clique, and then it becomes less about Jesus and more about our appearance as Christians. And then we're very quickly looking like the book of James, right? Giving partiality to each other and stuff like that. So in a redemptive way, because I sometimes look back on those first few years with a lot of remorse for the way I acted as a kind of a hypocritical Christian, but in a good reflective way. It was a blessing of a time to just be surrounded by Christians because I was able to read the Word a whole bunch and quickly learn a lot of things that I wanted to change about myself or have God change about me. I redirected my career path away from what I was doing at the time. I was studying engineering, but I was doing that because that's what my parents wanted me to do. And I realized it wasn't what I wanted. And I was able to kind of step a little bit out of fearing my parents' reaction and made that decision. My social circle did change for the good, as I began to make some really deep friendships with other believers, especially some that were recent converts that are still friends to this day. But the downside of this little journey of those couple years is I also quickly went from this very, very lonely dude, because I was very lonely growing up. Video games does that to you, right?
Yeah.
Very lonely dude, to having this amazing source of affirmation that was the Christian circle, right? The Christian community. I could find value and purpose and affirmation and even love, quote unquote, by being a good Christian. And so that definitely consumed that first few years of my life. Because I'm obviously free from that now, right? But yeah, so a lot of great experiences with crew and with the well. But I quickly found myself moving beyond searching for holiness, seeking to grow in faith, moving past that and too far and getting to a place of saying, I have to be perfect because these people depend on me. The ministry depends on me. If I fail, my life group's going to fail. You know, I'm going to fail my future wife. And that level of condemnation and personal perfection never truthful.
Did you find it easy to talk about?
We'll kind of talk through that a
Yeah.
little bit too.
Sorry about that. There's a little lag. But did you find it easy to talk about your struggles once you jumped into the faith, or, you know, a year into the faith with other believers? Or did you find that you had to live to a certain standard so you couldn't talk about your struggles?
That's a good question. I think I was pretty open. I was very open to like family and friends, almost to a fault. I remember some conversations that were like, bro, you don't got to just vomit on people. Like you can learn how to be tactful. But no, I was blessed with a group of guys, especially that first life group, led by I think, you know, Jeff Mueller and Patrick Chogus, wonderful guys. And they led that group and they really discipled me and taught me how to be authentic. And it wasn't about, you know, being perfect, but it also wasn't about just making excuse for falling short, but it was about pursuing holiness and pursuing reading the word and praying, right? And also having fellowship. So I think it was pretty easy to be open because I'm a pretty open dude.
Yeah, I think that's a huge difference between when I was growing up and in faith and when you were growing up in faith. Is I think when I was growing up, it was a lot more, you were a lot more protective of your stuff because there was a lot of judgment from others in the church. And then as I continued this journey, I realized, oh, it's okay to talk about your stuff. But then other things start going into the mind, like nobody really cares. Why even talk about it? Sure, I could talk about that, but what does it matter? And struggle with that. Anyhow, we're going a little bit off the subject. Let's come right back. Where did that road change a little bit with faith? Because it did drastically turn, right?
Yeah, it's pretty drastically. It wasn't a 90-degree turn. It was a bunch of little turns that ended up going in the opposite direction. So I thought that I was going to go do long-term mission work overseas. You know, I thought I'd be on staff with crew. I was on staff at the well at the time, leading, writing blog posts, kind of doing the whole Christian influencer thing. We're trying to, right? I probably, in reality, wasn't influencing many people, but I was I mean, I say that honestly, right? But my local circle, and I say this with a lot of like respect for the friends and family that I had, like they appreciated some of the things that I put out. They appreciated some of the ways God's created me to be in order. God's created me to be someone who processes things and talks about them. God's made me an influencer. Like that's the kind of person I am. But I was finding my status in that, and I was living for that. So when when I graduated college and I suddenly realized, okay, I can't really go on full-time mission work because there were some things in my life disqualifying and it just didn't feel right. And then being on staff at a church wasn't for me at the time There was a lot of anxiety that had come up in my life. And I wanted to be a provider for, at the time, what would be my future wife. So I went to talk to a Navy recruiter because a friend of mine told me that because I'm so OCD, I would love the Navy because they just tell you how to do it and you just do it. And that is some of the greatest wisdom that I've ever received from someone. I walked into a recruiter's office and I walked out with paperwork to sign. And like 2 months later, I was signing paperwork with an admiral getting put into the program. And it was exactly what God had for me because I needed to get out of Fresno and get out of that Christian bubble that was all I knew as a Christian.
Right. That comfort zone.
Yeah, it was super comfortable.
Right. Right. Yeah. You have the affirmation, you have the comfort, you have a good time. You go and do, you struggle through something, cool, call somebody, great, but you're never alone
Yeah.
because of that community. So you went into the Navy, and what did you do? What was some of your duties?
Yeah. So I commissioned as an officer in the submarine corps, or submarine. I actually don't even know what you call it. The submarine world, right? And if anyone hears that, they're going to give me crap for that. But so I commissioned. But what it is I had to go to school first 2 years, so I didn't really do anything for the first 2 years because all of our submarines are involved in nuclear propulsion. So we got to send our guys to schools to learn how to do nuclear propulsion because it's kind of sciencey, right? So I moved to South Carolina. I did get married right before that, and moved to South Carolina. Went to school for 2 years. Ended up going to Connecticut after that, spending 3 years stationed on a submarine in the submarine force, which is what it's called, submarine force, and got one deployment up in the North Atlantic Ocean. Spent some time in Spain in the Med, and lots of stories that I could talk about, and some that I can't.
Well, I'm never gonna be in a sub. I'm just gonna say that now, so I can only live through you and ask those questions. Like, what was that? How long did you have to live in a sub? What was the longest period of
So
being
my longest
trapped away?
Personally for me, the longest time that I went submerged, so like breathing fresh air to breathing fresh air, was about 45 days. And then the longest time I went between ports was like 55 or 60. So that was not record setting at all. Some submarines do way longer than that. My boat's schedule was a little different. But 45 days underwater was a trip to get to, and I got to be the officer of the deck in the bridge. So I got to be the first one coming up out of the hatch. And so I got that breath of fresh air, and it was like, whew, man, I missed the air.
Yeah, I could barely do 30 seconds inside an elevator, so I take stairs. I would never be able to do an elevator. Well, I mean, anyhow.
Well,
But
a lot of
I can
people,
do airplanes.
as you can imagine, like I get a lot of questions about submarining because it's a pretty niche experience for people. So like one of the things I always tell people is they are so much larger than you think. A lot of people toured submarines in San Diego or San Francisco, or they've toured the World War II ones where you're crawling between pipes. Like my boat was 3 stories tall on the inside. There were three decks, and longer than a football field. They're huge, and there's 140 guys on it, plus or minus. And it's not a tiny little. Now it is very compact, where you are stretching your toes out in your rack and you're touching the end, and you're putting stuff under your mattress to store it, and you're having to turn sideways in the hallways. But it's not like World War II movies where everybody's crawling over each other, and they're a lot bigger than you think.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Well, I'm still not going to do one. Never. Cool. So, being there, what were some of the things that you learned about yourself and about that community? Because that's a huge difference. I'm sure that was a different type of a community.
Yeah. So it's kind of split into 2 stories. As I thought about this question, there's the school period, and then there's the time on the boat. And so I'm going to address them both. So the school period was really tough. Nothing to do with the Navy. So that was a personal journey for myself because I had left that Christian community. literally moved from California to South Carolina, which is almost as far as you can go, right? Newly married at the time, not a lot of plans, and things got pretty sideways real quick, personally. Not to speak too much of my past relationship, but I would definitely say that myself had many expectations that were not met, specifically about myself. I expected myself to be so many different, perfect husband qualities. I expected so much consistency from myself. Oh, I'll be fine. I'm a Christian, so I'm going to be a loving husband. I'm going to be not harsh. I'm not going to be, unforgiving. I needed this other person who I left my whole community behind, and now I had this one person, right? I needed her to be that source of affirmation of my identity as a Christian. I needed her to affirm my value and worth and how good I am. And as you can imagine, and no one person can handle that. So she also had her own journey of a lot of struggles with that. So yeah, we had a pretty tumultuous time, to be honest, to our eventual divorce, which we'll probably talk about. But the school experience itself was really cool. Got to just kind of meet a whole new group of people, got plugged into a church somewhat, which is very different in South Carolina than Central California. A little more gospel-y. It was really awesome. A lot of Southern accents. And yeah, so from that, I learned pretty much how obsessed I was with being perfect, and how my anxiety was rooted most of all in not being able to perform for everybody in my life perfectly. And so that kind of came up, and it wasn't resolved in South Carolina. It kind of got resolved later.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what were some of the things that you learned about yourself when you were submerged in a sub, away from literally everybody, right? Because I don't know, how much contact do you have with the outside world through digital?
As much as I can talk about it, it depends on what you're doing. If we're just off the coast of Virginia, and we're coming up all the time, we have masks and we can send out. I was getting emails, but when we're on deployment, you're kind of, so you're dark when you're
but
on.
I'm sure it was a lot less. I'm sure it was a lot less. Like, you guys didn't have your Zoom nights for, college group, and it was like, there's none of, not like COVID, where it's like, if you're going to have communication, it has to be very specific. You're not going to go into like, do this and all right, let's have a good time. Let's do Zoom group night.
Yeah. So to kind of answer that question, and I think I'll answer it two ways of what I learned. The first one, I'm going to kind of piggyback off of South Carolina. So again, the struggles in South Carolina, and what I would personally call, and this is a buzzword, so forgive me because I don't mean it in the buzzword way, but it's like the beginning of like deconstructing some of my Christian experience. I am a proud Reformed Baptist believer right now, so that's not what I mean by deconstructing. But I was deconstructing my identity found in the acclaim of others saying I'm a great Christian, right? So that was the beginning of it. So when I showed up to a submarine now, submarine is a unique place. So I'm gonna share a little bit. So you have 120 dudes in a metal tube underwater, inherently wanting to go to the bottom of the ocean. Like that they sink, right? So they inherently want to just sink. So, you lose propulsion, you lose control surfaces, you have flooding, you have a casualty like a fire where you lose the control room. Like you can't just go overboard like a ship. You can't just jump out like an airplane with a parachute. You're, hundreds of feet underwater, right? So everybody on a submarine depends on every other person to be able to respond in the moment of casualty to get the right action started. If a fire starts, they need to be able to respond immediately to mitigate it, right? If there's flooding, they need to call it away properly so we can take right actions, right? So there's such a level of dependency on everybody, from the commanding officer to, a senior mechanic, to the cook, to an electrician, to a guy like me who's been on board for 5 minutes, right? Everybody's lives literally depend on each other. So with that, right, I went from this world realizing that I wasn't getting affirmed because that's what I crave, right? Into now this crazy chaotic world where everybody's lives depend on me. And that is taught from day one, is that if you're not part of the team, you're not going to make it here. Getting your submarine warfare qualification was a crucible because we only qualify those people whom we trust with our lives, right? And so I naturally began to find my identity in becoming a submariner because I could find affirmation there. I wasn't necessarily finding it like I had before. I wasn't finding it in my, struggling marriage at the time. So I did dive head in. I dove in head first. I did kind of submerge into it. But what I quickly learned as a Christian is that nobody on that boat cared that I was a Christian. Like none of them cared pro or con. Like they didn't care. They had jobs to do. You were working 12 to 15-hour days in port. And then when you're out to sea, you're working 24 hours a day. You're pretty much always working or sleeping. So nobody cared about my faith. Nobody cared that I was a Christian. Nobody had, those kind of conversations because everything was about the mission, the boat, qualifications, right? But what I found out to get to the end of my 3-year journey on that boat is that people did care about having integrity, about being virtuous, about loving them, about showing them grace and forgiveness and compassion. People did care about these qualities that Christ calls us to and that the Spirit helps us have, right? And so by the end of my tour, I had a lot of folks that I was given encouragement by, even some letters of dudes who just encouraged me about the influence I had on them. And those are the people that like I just treated like human beings and just loved them. And I talked about my faith a little bit, but my main focus was seeking their best well-being, sharing the gospel with them, of course, but just seeking to help them succeed in their mission rather than beating them with the Bible, because I just want them to tell me, yes, I believe, and give me all the affirmation, right? And so that was like the first lesson I learned, was how nobody cared that I was a Christian, right? And that was shocking at first, but it ended up being a very great environment for me to, again, kind of work through deconstructing that identity a little bit. Yeah. And then
I mean,
second
you
part,
couldn't just walk away after if you got upset with them or anything. Like you couldn't just like not return their text message. It's like, I'm gonna see you and I have to depend on you to do your job, and you have to depend on me. Like there's no separating that. Like when you're out here.
Yeah, that's spot on. And so the second,
there's a lot to
the
learn
second
from
answer. Yeah, and another thing that I would share that's like a other side of the coin for that same point is that God did bless me with a chance to be the command lay leader on the boat. So there's no chaplains on the submarines because small crews. So I got to fill in for the chaplain, basically, which meant I was authorized to hold services, to do Bible studies, and I was every single new sailor that checked on introduced themselves to me because I was a resource. So God did give me a position as a Christian that was very fruitful. I think on deployment, we had like 20 dudes who walked through the whole Gospel of Mark over deployment. It was awesome. Some guys had never read the Bible and they were asking questions about Peter versus James, near the end. It was awesome, super encouraging. But again, in that affirmation would normally I would have been doing that to get other Christians to kind of praise me. But on the submarine, I was doing it because I saw these dudes who first off didn't know the Lord, many of them, right? But secondly, who needed a source of hope, needed something routine, and it was good for their souls to get together and read the word. Because again, as Christians, we believe that. But to be able to say that to a non-Christian and have them show up and have them read the Bible with you and just walk away, not have to feel like I need to have them raise their hand and pray the prayer, right? But just share and sow seed and let the seed fall where it does was really encouraging and was a brand new experience for me because my whole Christian life before had always been just Christians. And it was always about encouraging a brother and sharing the gospel with a brother, which is, again, great things. But when you don't interact with those who have never heard the gospel, you quickly forget what it's like to have never heard the gospel. And that is probably like the greatest shift that came out of my time on the boat, is just realizing that like I have something to share with people, and I'm supposed to share it and I can water it, but God gives the growth, right? That doesn't mean I just sit there. Like I still am supposed to share it and I'm still supposed to water it, but I'm not supposed to count myself worthy based off of the growth, right? God's the one that grows. God's the one that brings people to faith. God's the one that sustains them, just like he did me through these horrendously hard times.
Right.
So that's kind of like a big picture I learned in the submarine, in terms of like my spiritual experience. I have lots of stories about like my work ethic and what it's like to not sleep for 3 days, and what it's like to, almost break something that's millions of dollars. But those are other stories.
We can have a part 2. I want to hear it.
Yeah.
So now getting back into this, Fresno, what was that transition like?
I think it lagged there for a sec. We good?
It did lag. It did lag. Yeah. So let me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Transition back
Did
to
you get the
Fresno.
question?
I heard you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Perfect.
So, so right before my deployment, about 8 months before my deployment, my now ex-wife came back to Fresno and then said that she wanted to file for divorce. Long story there. The separation was what we needed. Like, and at the time it was, because our relationship continued to kind of struggle, and just really bad communication. And submarine life, man, you're working 100-hour weeks. Like, it's hard to have anything other than the boat, right? And I could have done so much better. But regardless, so after she had left, I made the decision to leave the Navy, come back to Fresno, and do whatever I could to try to reconcile. I felt like that at the time was what God had for me. And it was a step of faith, because it didn't make sense. All my friends on the boat, they were like, good for you, man, but it's kind of dumb. That's what they all said. And I had to explain to them that I felt this is what God had for me, man. He wanted me to go and try to make right and try to reconcile. So I came back to Fresno at the end of 2021. That then didn't work out, unfortunately. But coming back into Fresno, suddenly I was surrounded by a small group of people that I knew previously, but a lot of new faces. And really quickly, I found that itch again of like, man, I kind of like just being able to talk to people about Jesus that know about Jesus and can affirm what I'm saying. And it doesn't take a lot of effort to preach to other Christians. That's another thing I learned, is it doesn't take a lot of effort to feel like you influence other Christians, because they understand the basics. But it takes a lot of effort to walk through the gospel with someone who's never read the Bible, right? That's tangent. But so I was blessed beyond measure with 2 really good friends of mine, Pearl and Cody, who I think you know them both, Cody Curtin. And wonderful friends from college who introduced me to this group, kind of college age, young professional age group. And I got about 6 months of quality time with these folks, just lots of nights talking about scripture, but also pouring my heart out, kind of processing my journey back into the civilian world, as well as getting divorced. A lot of them just bore with me through it and just walked with me through it. And it was honestly refreshing, because I had kind of deconstructed a little bit of my identity in other Christians, to where these other Christians, like, I was able to just be vulnerable with them and not have an answer for what I was going through, and just tell them that I believe in God, but right now I'm hurting, and all these things, right? But it kind of culminated around May of 22. So last year, when I ended up taking a job up in Livermore. So I was leaving this Christian community again. And God blessed me with a church up here immediately. So I definitely have not been starved for community. But what I realized in that was, again, I had spent so much of my time down in Fresno with just Christians that I almost once again forgot how to interact with non-Christians. So I go to my new job, and once again, I'm just kind of like, not really wanting to talk to anybody that's not a Christian, kind of getting anxious because I don't really know, like I don't have that affirmation. And yeah, and it kind of worked through this process when I was actually doing regen with the well, which I'm sure you're familiar
Hmm.
with. A lot
Yeah.
of people love it, some people don't. I would say it's a useful tool. I'd say that it could also be used improperly. And what regen
Right.
taught me overall was that my identity was not just in other Christians, but my identity was actually in my ability to control their happiness, control their outcomes, make them
Mm.
feel a certain way, people pleasing. So getting to like lose that community again, and I go to Fresno all the time, so I still have all those friends, but like not
Right.
living daily with them kind of forced me to look in the mirror again and say, wow, Jacob, you're right back where you were 8 years ago. And that experience, which took a few months, it wasn't one moment, but a few months of just looking in the mirror and saying, I'm right where I was, just wanting Christian community to tell me that things are going to be okay. Looking at the mirror and having that moment allowed me to just pause and not turn inward and hate myself like I normally would want to do for feeling that
Mm.
way, but instead say, well, God, that's why I need you daily. That's part of the whoever said the Christian story is filled with happiness and stress free and no anxiety and no struggles. Like nobody ever said that. But for some reason, I believed that a true Christian would never struggle, would never have anxiety, would
Mm.
never look in the mirror and hate himself. Right. And that lie that so damaged my marriage with my ex wife, it doesn't live in me in the same way anymore. And that's such an incredible journey that I've had to go on with God. And it's still got a long way to go, but it's a testimony that I can share with people who might struggle with that level of like perfectionism and self hatred that can consume
Yeah.
someone. But yeah, does that kind of answer? I think I kind of went off a little bit
Yeah.
there.
Yeah. No, that was awesome. No, that was good because yeah, I mean, everything that you said is true. Like we do struggle with that. Do you still find yourself wanting to just jump into Christian community again, like the way that you were in high school, or I mean in college?
Honest, say this because right now the people pleasing's kicking. I'm like, how do I want to say this to like? It's like no. Of course, Christian community is invaluable, and my church has been such a
Right.
blessing with the fellowship that I get to have with them. We have prayer nights on Wednesday nights that have been like a staple in my life the last year and a half. Um,
Hmm.
but when I spend a lot of time with just Christians, I do find myself really quickly start to have these grandiose ideas of ways that I can be more effective for the kingdom. And a lot of those things are actually
Mm.
just looking for more praise for me. But when I'm around non-believers, specifically at work, when I'm focused on what God has for me, my family, I realize that life's pretty busy by itself. So you don't have to keep going out and looking for next things to do. You just kind of need to do what's in front of you. I don't know if that answers your question, but I don't run from it, but I know how quickly I could let it consume me again. And I don't want it to.
Yeah. I mean, it is a hard thing to do when you get into a life group, you get into the church, not to stay surrounded by that community because then you start planning things. Oh man, we're gonna go hang out this weekend or to go do this, and and then you start planning these serve events. I love serve events, but
Mhm.
why is it an event? It should be every single moment, every
Yeah.
single day of your life, not for this 5 minutes or an hour together with your Christian community. It should be every single moment, every single day,
Yeah.
to every person that you meet.
Mm.
But we do find ourselves getting into the event and being comfortable. Yeah, I mean, I find myself doing that too.
Yeah.
Um, or I find myself being comfortable just being by myself. I mean, COVID definitely. Uh,
Yeah.
I didn't like it at the beginning, and then I learned to just love it. And my favorite room was my room. My
Mm.
favorite thing to do was, all right, done with work, go home and leave people alone.
Yeah. No. And to comment on that, Tony, um, my journey of I guess I'd say solitude in a lot of ways. Um, from when my ex-wife had left, it was almost a year till we deployed. Then the deployment, which I was surrounded by dudes, but I spent a lot of nights alone, sitting in my stateroom with the Lord, never alone, of course. And then following that, like I drove cross country for 30 days by myself, and I did a lot of work in Fresno. Like I spent a lot of time for Jacob, a lot of time alone because I'm such a people person, right? I've always been told that, but I realized that I'm not actually, and this is personal, like Jacob level, but I'm not actually as much of an extrovert and like a people person as I come off. Everyone thinks I'm 100%, but the reality is I just find my affirmation in people. But I actually, when I like am healthy, I kind of like to be alone quite a bit, if I'm honest. And that's been like another journey I've had to walk. So I'm actually recently engaged and I'm walking through a really exciting season with my fiance. And like we spend a lot of time together and it's awesome. And we've talked through like what it's like to have our own time. And it's been really cool to have that healthy conversation of like, on this surface, I want to just be with you and others all the time. But that's actually not good for me because part of that is I'm trying to affirm my status in life, affirm what I'm doing based off of these emotional experiences rather than be content with what's healthy, like maybe deciding to not come to Fresno one weekend because I really need to just get work done up in Livermore, and that's like a whole nother journey for me, which would take another podcast of like not just being busy, right? But you hit a good point when you said we, and I'd say we as the Christian community, especially like the evangelical non-denom kind of world, we love being busy with other Christians. And it's just sometimes robs us from the joy of being bored because life is really boring in terms of like the normal mundane day-to-day thing. And when you just have highs on your free time and then boredom at work, we wonder why we don't evangelize at work because work is boring. Work's not fun. We have all this versus like bringing it to the same level and saying dominion, right? God's called us to be fruitful in the three main places, the family, the workplace, and the church. We're supposed to go out and be fruitful in those three areas. You shouldn't exalt one over the other. So just get busy, but you don't have to like add more on top of it. Just if you talk about family, church, and work, you probably got enough to keep you busy there. You don't need to plan a bunch of other things. Just be faithful and be okay if it feels inefficient because God doesn't call us to be efficient. He calls us to be faithful.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. I like that. It's okay not to be efficient. It's okay not to go to Fresno this weekend. It's okay to be alone or to go and travel for 30 days and, just you and God.
Yeah.
But you got to find that balance because then you go to the other side where it's like, no, you just want to be alone, which I think COVID put a lot of us in. Definitely put me in. There's so many different ways. You just want to be alone, or you just want to be with Christians, or there's so much on that. Any other part of the journey you want to share? I mean, we are coming to the end of this, and I think that you have definitely shared a lot of great insight, and with your story that people will learn from. But is there anything else that you just like, I got to get this out?
I guess. I mean, I wrote some notes too, but I didn't look down at them at
Yeah.
all.
Yeah.
But honestly, and that's part of the problem is I wrote notes down because I wanted to be ready rather than just so like that. I mean, there's a great lesson I would take away from this.
Yeah.
But yeah, a little bit more on that dominion piece, kind of as we've been talking. How do I make this short? Just with coming to terms with what faith is. And like, again, I look back and I was definitely converted freshman year of college, right? But my faith is, as expected, very immature, very quickly burnt up by the sun, and it had to kind of be replanted a lot, right? And I'm still, I guarantee, going to get burnt up by the sun again and have to get some replanting in the next 50 years, right? But being okay with not having all the answers, not having a 10-year plan, not having a 1-year plan, like being okay with that is so essential, especially for us men. So you got to think about the way we were designed, right? We were designed to operate in a very small world, right? Cars weren't part of God's original design. Phones weren't, they're not bad, but they weren't part of the design, right? Phones weren't part of the original design, the internet, right? We were called to be fruitful with what was in front of us. And so often we are searching for the furthest thing to be fruitful when we just neglect the stuff right in front of us. It reminds me of the man, the oppressed by many demons over across that Jesus do. And after, and they got me. Sorry, it went circle. Anyways, the
Yeah,
village
go
people
back
came
to
over and they saw him.
go back to. I'm gonna cut this, so go ahead and go back to what it
Okay,
reminds you of, because that's where it stopped.
got it. So this season, or this discussion about being fruitful, reminds me of the demon possessed man across the sea in the Gergesenes or Gerasenes or whatever. And after the legion, the pigs, they go, they drown, right? This guy's in his right mind. And they all get in the boat to leave, and he tries to get in the boat. And he says, "Let me come with you, Rabbi." And Jesus looks at him and says, "No, return to your hometown and tell them what the Lord has done for you." Right. Now, that's something that has really impacted me because I'm literally not in Fresno technically, but I'm back in California. I'm back in my home. I'm interacting with my family again, and I have a chance to share this story, right? But I'm still so tempted to just fill my time with other things rather than just be fruitful with what's in front of me. And so my encouragement for people slash what I'm sharing here is just taking a moment to realize that sometimes your week is full. Sometimes you plan prayer group and then you have ministries and you do outreach and you have busy days, and that's okay. But some days it's not going to be busy. And that doesn't mean you're failing, but it also doesn't mean you're succeeding because your time is full, right? We're called to faithful obedience. We got to protect that Sabbath. So if you're not resting, and this is to myself too, if you're not resting, if you're not worshiping the Lord and then resting on Sunday, which is not required, but it's a good idea. Like, if you're not doing that, that's a good red flag that you're not being faithful because God wants you to rest, right? But sometimes, like my current season of life, it feels like I don't know where it's all going, but I know exactly that God is going to take care of the details. And it's almost like it's inversely related, where the more that you trust God open handed, where you don't have an idea how it's going to work out, you feel more peace in the end. You actually feel peace. It's not just superficial peace, but it's actually a peace saying, "God, I'm believing this is what you told me to do. So I'm just going to do it, because if I try to control it, it's going to get way worse." And I'm still learning, and maybe you could draw something out of that, but yeah, that's kind of where I'm at today and how I'm
Yeah,
still kind of living my life today.
yeah. There's so much more that we could talk about with
Yeah.
that, even in just the living and taking what God has for you and not really expecting anything. I think I talked about this a little bit with some friends recently, where we go for a goal, and when we don't hit that goal or that mark, then we failed. But maybe the plan wasn't for you to hit that mark anyway. The plan was for you to go and try for it and learn whatever was there so that you can use it over here. It wasn't necessarily to, buy a big house or whatever it is. And it was just the journey. It was just part of the journey so that you can learn and change and shift and not rely on wanting that control. Anyhow,
Mm-hmm.
something that just popped in my
No,
mind. So,
spot
all
on.
right, so you did say a lot of great things, but what is one thing that you would tell a new believer, a new dude, where you were, in college life? Uh, what is one thing that you would tell him?
It's gonna make me laugh because so many people told me this probably too. Uh, let me think of how to word it. I think if I met a 19-year-old Christian who freshman year of college never read the Bible, convicted by the Holy Spirit, boom, believer. I would tell him 3 quick tenets to like build his life on. One is memorize the word, because memorizing the word is what has gotten me through these later years. The last few years is having the word on my heart. So memorize the word, slow down. You don't have to solve the world's problems overnight, right? And that God doesn't need you. Specifically, there are people in your life that God has put there. And this is the big one, but there are people that God has put in your life, whether they're your friends, your families, your classmates, your strangers, your coworkers, the random person that gets on the elevator with you, people on a submarine, a future spouse. There are people who have needs you can meet, that God wants you to meet their needs. He's made you to meet their needs, but nobody actually needs you. God is the one that sustains everything. God's the one that spoke it to existence. God's going to culminate it together. Every knee will bow, every tongue will confess Christ is king today, and he's going to reign, he's going to rule. We're probably going to die well before that happens. That's okay. But you have things to do, but nobody really needs you. So don't take it so seriously. And that's the biggest thing I wish I could tell myself that I would want to tell someone is just memorize the word, slow down, but don't take it so seriously. It doesn't depend on you.
Right. Awesome. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for coming in on this. And I will see you soon. Thanks for joining us, everyone. Submergelife.com. Go listen to all the episodes. Go subscribe, like, share, comment, whatever. You know. All right. See you soon.
This episode is brought to you by Merge Marketing. For all of your needs on print, design, web page design, and security, go to mergemarketinginc.com.